Welcome to Torah Today Ministries, our continuing series, Sage Advice, where we look into some of the great sages in Jewish history who've left behind their commentaries, their books, their teachings that have profoundly impacted my own life, as well as the lives of thousands and thousands of others. And so in the Messianic community, I found that many people are unaware of some of these great works. And so it's a joy to introduce people to some of the wonderful insights that these great men of God had. Now, as with anything written by men, even if it's a book I wrote, I encourage you, eat the meat, spit out the bones. Because in any work that's written by a mere mortal, unless it's inspired scripture, is probably going to have some distortions, some errors, and not on purpose, but by virtue of the fact that we are imperfect, the things we produce tend to be imperfect as well. So with all of these men, don't hear what I'm writing as a blanket endorsement of every single word they wrote. I wouldn't give that endorsement to any author that I read. But eat the meat, spit out the bones. Always have God at your elbow as you read and discern what you read. Now, with the Chofetz Chaim, I can pretty much endorse everything I've read of his because it's so profound and so good. I found very few bones, if any, in what I've read of his works. So let's get right into it. His name is not really the Chofetz Chaim. That is just how he is referred to. And you'll hear him referred to that even now. That's the most familiar title for him. But his real name is R Yisrael Meir Kagan. And he lived from 1839 to 1933 in Belarus. And he's primarily remembered for his teachings on Lashon Hara, or Loshen Hora, as some pronounce it. Lashon Hora means evil speech. Lashon means tongue. Ra means evil, so the evil tongue. And if there's ever a subject we need educated on, it's Lashon Hara, evil speech, gossip. And I remember in the early days of Beth Tikkun, we purchased a copy of a book that has the Chofetz Chaim's teachings in it. We provided a copy to every single family at Beth Tikkun. And it spared us a lot of pain and a lot of trouble for a good decade and a half. And there simply was no gossip. There was just no evil speech. Because his works are that profound. If we read them, it will change the way you use your mouth. So, why was he called the Chofetz Chaim? Well, in Psalm 34:12, verses 12 and 13, it says, "Who is the man who desires life?" Now in Hebrew, that's Chofetz Chaim. Chaim is life. Chofetz means to desire. Who is the man who Chofetz Chaim? What do you have to do to have, if you really desire life? And loves length of days, that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil. So this was the cornerstone of much of the Chofetz Chaim's writings. He wrote on other subjects, and he was a brilliant scholar. Excuse me. But this is what he is primarily known for, his works about Lashon Hara. So, if you desire life, you love length of days, want to see good, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. When his first book was printed, you can see here it's called Sefer Chofetz Chaim, the book of Who Desires Life. And when he wrote this, he had no idea that Chofetz Chaim would become the title by which he was known, because he was so identified with this book. And others he also wrote on Lashon Hara. So here are a few facts about the Chofetz Chaim, and I ask your forgiveness if I cough once in a while. It's getting cold here in Northeast Ohio, and I get this annual throat junk going on, and every once in a while it just hits me and I have to cough. So I apologize ahead of time if I get into a coughing jag during this teaching. He was a great Torah scholar, but generally kept this hidden from others. He was a very, very righteous man, a godly man. And there are so many stories told about him by people who met him and knew him. Just a couple come to mind. He was traveling by train to a town to speak at the synagogue. And as the train pulled up to the station, there were hundreds of people on the platform and up and down the tracks watching for the coming of this train. And so he asked his traveling companion, what are all these people doing here? Is somebody important coming? Are they waiting for somebody important? And his attendant looked at him and says, they're waiting for you. And it never occurred to him that people would come to hear him speak in such numbers. And another thing, he was so conscientious of how he used his mouth that one time he was riding in a carriage with some people. He paid his fare and got on the carriage for this trip. And as they went on, the people in the carriage started talking about horses, the quality of horses and what makes a good horse and a bad horse. And then somebody mentioned a neighbor and started talking about this neighbor, and the Chofetz Chaim asked the driver to stop so he could get off. And the driver said, well, why? There are no houses here. This is not a town. Why do you want to get off? And the Chofetz Chaim says, as long as you're talking with horses, I was content to stay on the carriage. But if you're going to talk negatively about people, I'm going to get off because I don't want to hear it. And he really lived by what he believed. And one of the stories that sticks in my mind the most is the Chofetz Chaim was staying at an inn in his travels. And he had his own room, and his attendant stayed in the room next door. And in the middle of the night, in the wee hours of the morning, the attendant heard some muttering and noises and weeping coming from next door, from the Chofetz Chaim's room. So he went over and he looked through a crack in the door. And he saw the Chofetz Chaim standing with his face in a corner, weeping and weeping. And he was in prayer, asking God to forgive him as he reviewed his sins of the previous day, of how he had said things he shouldn't have said, how he had harbored emotions he shouldn't harbor. And this young attendant, watching this, could hardly believe his eyes. He was so convicted because this was the holiest man he had ever met. And yet this holy man was so broken by his own, what we would consider minor offenses. So it's just a real challenge to think of such godly men who grieve so much over their own sin and their own misuse of the tongue. We need to learn from such men as these. Anyways, back to some of our list of facts. He published his first book, Sefer Chofetz Chaim, which we just saw the title page of it. He published it anonymously because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. When he was 35 years old, he went on to publish additional works on the subject of Lashon Hara, evil speech. And he went from town to town as an anonymous book peddler. He would sell his books, but he would not tell people he was the author. He did not want any undue attention to himself. And if people had a criticism of the book, he wanted to hear it without them knowing he was the author and maybe withholding a criticism or a correction. One of the things he's so well known for saying is our negative conversations are the key which opens the door for Satan to prosecute. Wow. Our negative conversations are the key to the door that Satan uses to prosecute us. In the Torah, when you read the commentaries on the Torah, and you come to Leviticus in that long section that describes leprosy, the commentators all agree that the number one cause of leprosy was Lashon Hara, evil speech. And we see this with Miriam. She didn't even say anything all that critical about her brother Moses. She simply stated something to Aaron about Moses' marriage to this other woman. And as a result, God struck her with leprosy. She had leprosy for a week. So it's something God takes very seriously. A few quotes. After Rabbi Yisrael Meir, the Chofetz Chaim, published his book, Chofetz Chaim, people would ask him, now that you published this book with so many restrictions on speech, how are we able to speak? To this he replied, to the contrary, before I wrote this book, you were forbidden to speak, for you did not know the pertinent laws. But now that my book details what is forbidden and what is permitted, you may speak. In other words, we need a guide on how to speak. And Chofetz Chaim is saying, now you can speak, now that you have a guide for that. And his rules for speech are all derived directly out of the Word of God. And so it's very deeply grounded on the Torah and the writings and the prophets. If you'd like to access some of his teachings, this is the book I recommend. And this is the book we purchased for families at Beth Tikkun. I'll hold it up here so hopefully camera 2 will get a good image of it. It's called Chofetz Chaim, A Daily Companion. And what this book does, you get it in hardback, paperback, a small personal size you can carry with you. What it does, it breaks his writings down into a devotional that covers about 128 days. So for each day, there is a 2-page spread you can read for that day. So everything's in bite-sized pieces, day by day. So you can read it through several times in 1 year. And it's very accessible, and it's filled with illustrations of how to speak and how not to speak, when it's right to criticize and when it's inappropriate to criticize. And one of the big questions is, when is it appropriate to share negative speech about someone else? I remember asking an Orthodox Messianic rabbi once, I says, when is it appropriate to share negative speech about somebody? And he looked at me and said, if you know a dog bites, warn me. And that's been my guide. Well, the Chofetz Chaim takes that concept and expands on it a bit. And because there are appropriate times to share with someone negative speech about someone else. But most of the time it's inappropriate to do so. So let me share an excerpt from A Daily Companion. And this book, The Daily Companion, by the way, is published by Art Scroll Publishers. If you print the notes or look at them, you'll see at the bottom of the notes a link where you can go to purchase a copy. The Chofetz Chaim points out how mild this case of Lashon Hara was. Miriam spoke about her brother, whom she loved and for whom she had risked her own life. She did not say something derogatory about him. All she did was mistakenly equate Moshe with other prophets. That's all she did. Moreover, her words were not said in Moshe's presence or in public. And we know that Moshe wasn't hurt by her words and that there was no negative fallout. The Chofetz Chaim explains that this is precisely why the Torah uses this incident to teach us the evils of Lashon Hara. Despite all these factors and Miriam's great personal merit, she was still punished. And I'm reminded the Messiah says we'll be held accountable for every word we spoke. Oh my goodness, that should convict all of us. One more excerpt from A Daily Companion. Married couples often mistakenly think that passing information from one to the other is not rechilus. Now that's a Hebrew word that means gossip. They assume that because their lives are so intertwined, each should know what the other knows. This, the Chofetz Chaim cautions us, is wrong. Quote, one should not reveal this to others, even to members of his own household, unquote. A classic illustration of the dangers of rechilus, of gossip between husband and wife, is the tragic episode of Korah's rebellion. So, you're going to find some very convicting things, I'll warn you right now as you read this book. But it also provides hope that you can begin to rein in your own tongue. And this is a book I've had to go back to and will go back to again in the future and reread, because every once in a while we need a refresher course because without constant vigilance, our tongues begin to develop a mind of their own, and they run away, dragging us behind. So we want to be in control of our tongues and not let them be in control of us. One of the things the Chofetz Chaim teaches, and you'll read about it in the Daily Companion, is that whenever there is Lashon Hara, there are three victims. The one who speaks is a victim. The one who hears the evil speech is a victim. And the one who is the subject of the speech is also a victim. And he also speaks about how it's kinder just to kill someone outright, because then you only kill their body. But when you gossip about them, you're destroying their character. You kill my body, my character lives on. Destroy my character. Then what can I do? What can I do to revive it? So we need to be very, very careful. And I highly recommend this book. And I hope you'll make it a part of your library and a part of your daily readings. And as a result, I know that you will enjoy length of days and you will see life. Because if you, Chofetz Chaim, if you desire life and length of days, you keep your tongue from evil. So I encourage you to read this, and I hope to hear back from you and the changes you experience in your own life as you begin to exercise more control over this thing that causes so much trouble. So until next time, I wish you shalom, and may God bless.
Roger that.